Hello, fabulous friends, fans, and superstars. Welcome to Synchronicity Web TV. I am your host, Nadiya Shah, and this is your moment of synchronicity. Well, I'm so excited to celebrate with you once again, a regular guest that I know so many of you love so much, the one and only superstar astrologer, Cameron Allen. Now, you guys know how much I love Cameron. I'm so proud of him. I'm so impressed by him as well. And I love that he's such a part of Synchronicity University and all that he brings. He has this incredible way of understanding astrology and medical astrology and our connection to the sky through body. But more than that, he's also a herbalist, and he brings a spiritual understanding to all things related to herbs and plants and physicality as well. And he's actually somebody who's personally helped me. I mean, I know I try not to take advantage of it, but I know that if something's off, something's hurting, I can contact him and say, oh my God, my shoulder hurts, what to do? And he brings so much nuance and depth and knowledge and has helped me to heal in different ways. And so I'm so excited that Cameron is back at Synchronicity University by request of students. This time, Cameron is back just in time for the new year, presenting a course on medical astrology as only he can. It is going to be such a thorough course to really help you to understand this ancient understanding of medicinal, or I should say medical astrology, and how body connects with cosmos. And it is such an honor and such a special moment again to celebrate with you, the one and only Cameron Allen. Cameron, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Hey, Nadiya, thanks for having me again. And always love coming and chatting with you and everybody here at Synchronicity University. It's such a gift. And yeah, it always warms my heart.
Well, thank you again. I should add to everybody out there, there's just a few days left to choose your tuition rate, as low as just $5 a class, an unheard of rate to learn from the one and only Cameron Allen. And his course starts in January 2023, which is like literally right around the corner. But you know, the Cameron that you see on camera, I will say, is a lot like the Cameron you see in person, because I've had a chance to hang out with him a couple of times in person now. And so I know that this is going to be so natural and fun for us to enjoy. And so, Cameron, just maybe take a second or two to just let people know, for the very few people who might be watching you for the first time, because I know you're so out there. There are so many opportunities that you're getting in astrology that are very well earned by you. But if you had to introduce yourself to somebody, what are some of the things you would say?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is that I'm a student of nature. The second thing that I would say is I've been loving, because right now I'm in the Ayurveda school. And so it's just deepening my process with understanding the energetic dynamics behind not only astrology, but also just Ayurveda. And I'm being able to tie it in with my understanding of herbs and other forms of astrology, because I've also taken a lot of different approaches with astrology, and like my ability to synthesize them has been like, yeah, it's like one of the best things that is happening right now for me in my life. And so those are the things that I would say, as well as just like my embodiment of being a human. And I think that's like really important, because sometimes we can get caught in the world of thought and in the celestial spheres, but to bring that to the terrestrial terrain and really understand how they both go together, and gaining a strong foundational understanding of the celestial spheres, but also a strong foundation of I can listen to my body, I can hear what it's telling me to do, so that we can build a relationship and a bridge between the two, so that we don't rely just on astrology and we don't rely just on our body, but both of them are like very reliable, and we can synthesize those things to make it embodied and not just in our heads. So that's what I would say.
I love that, because I think about how the ancients, whether we think about it in terms of the ancients in astrology, there is such a strong tradition, like literally going back millennia, of understanding this whole discipline of medical astrology, understanding how the body is connected to the cosmos. And I'm reminded of a work by Plato called Timaeus. And one of my books is called The Body and the Cosmos. And it's not medical astrology, like I'm very clear on that. But basically, Plato writes about how the sky and the the different elements of the sky, and our bodies are intimately connected. He talks about how there are spiritual attributes associated with each physical body part. And so I actually took that and connected it to the zodiac and connected it to astronomical phenomenon. However, an astrological phenomenon. However, of course, it's not medical astrology the way that you have your very deep rootedness in that whole tradition. And also the thing is that what's especially fascinating is that it isn't just the practice of medical astrology. I mean, I love that you talked about how you're learning new things, because there's so much to know in astrology that one lifetime isn't enough to know all there is to know. And so I love that you appreciate that and you keep growing. And yet at the same time, you know a lot. You know your stuff, you know a lot, because I know that I've gone to you and I've said, hey, this is an issue. And you've been able to understand it with so many different angles, which is quite phenomenal. So I love that you also own that you do already know a lot and you have so much to teach as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a forever thing for me. And that's one of the reasons why I've chosen to stick with astrology, because with my Gemini moon, I always need to keep learning, and I know that there's no end in sight here. So yeah, I just stay rooted in that. And also just being mindful to synthesize it with a large variety of different things, because just astrology to me is not enough to be of true service to people that I'm working with. And I think it's important for people to know that life experiences and knowledge in other fields enhances our astrology tenfold. Yeah. Wow.
The willingness to live fully and engage life fully. I love that you talked about this idea of being embodied as well. I remember now this shows you how much I can share with Cameron, like I'll share right now and with everybody else out there. Recently I shared online that, I did live in Mexico for 10 years, and literally like a week ago from the time we're recording this, I left Mexico, and that it's been such a huge transition for me. But when I was leaving, I wrote something online and I shared my love for that country. And a big part of what made me really love being there was that is where I learned that life is not lived in concepts, in books. It isn't a theory. Life is an embodied experience. Life is something that happens within our incarnation, and that we are incarnated for a reason. And that's really where I learned not just balance, but also, I talked in this post, and I'll try to link to it below for those who are interested, because I shared it here on YouTube as well. But I talk about how it was in Mexico that I learned to dance, and I learned what it is to really feel alive in a way that will stay with me for the rest of my life. And I think that's a big part of what medical astrology is actually rooted in as well. This idea that we are embodied for a reason, and that our bodies themselves are a spiritual experience, whether that spiritual experience is found in dancing or in movement or in engagement. It's when we think that the physical experience is all that there is, the bodily experience that is all that there is, that we sort of go down a rabbit hole that isn't balanced, isn't healthy. But I think sometimes in spiritual circles, we go way the other way as well. We say, I am not my body. And we just focus more on our spiritual evolution and not necessarily on how it is that our bodies are interacting with us as part of our spiritual journey as well.
Yeah, 1000%. I think that's really important to be mindful of, because I've heard both sides, like you're saying, and I always like to say all these things are true, but I just like to add a just to it. It's like, I am not just my body. I am not just my spirit. I am not just my soul. I'm not just my emotions. And then being present and allowing them to all have this like dynamic tension or this dynamic play with each other until I can express all of these seeming parts in like a holistic expression. And it's a continuous journey that's always evolving. And that's how I like to teach too, because a lot of times, like the people that I would learn from, they would either be on the side of being just intuitive, and then others would be on the side of, no, when Saturn goes over here or when Jupiter goes over your ascendant, you're going to gain weight. And I have found that all these things are not necessarily true. There can be indications that amplify or lessen the possibility of it, but I find those things not to be true. And I find the people that I work with always have a tendency to like allow themselves to be present in either one, not get caught up in the thought land and not just be like fated to have these experiences, but like enact the energetics of the planets, you know, just thinking of the as above, but so below. So if these planets that have light move around the sky and they do something, that means also reflected there's a light in me that can have the awareness to be able to move with those energies. So it's important.
You mentioned Jupiter on the ascendant and how there are these textbook explanations, but of course it isn't like one size fits all. It's not like just because Jupiter crosses the ascendant, it equals this. It's not a mathematical formula. In some ways, what we do, in many ways, what we do is divination for that very reason, because it requires that engagement on a level of, I would say, poetry as well. But in a very, literal kind of way, I will say, in my experience, Jupiter on the ascendant is things like your appearance might change, but it tends to be for the better in some way. Your vitality gets a boost for the better in some way. And so would you agree with that? Because I found if it's good for you to gain weight, you might gain weight. If it's good for you to instead experience like hope and positive energy and let that be part of what guides your energy going forward, especially during that transit, then that may be the way it shows up. And if it's good for you to, like, personally, I always lose weight when Jupiter crosses the ascendant, and it's a Jupiter, it is a Cancer ascendant too. So you wouldn't think that that would be the case, but that always happens. And I think it's because it's just like, I feel lighter, I feel happier. So I'm feeling more buoyant, and that starts to show in my appearance as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I've seen it expressed in a variety of different ways, but what I can say is I don't think that Jupiter is necessarily making people gain weight even when Jupiter goes over the ascendant. What I think it's doing is making people indulge in life. And that, like, and especially if someone's feeling a sense of not having optimism, it might make them indulge and go too far, which might lead to someone gaining weight. However, oftentimes what I see and what I invite people to actually imprint or inflict on life or be with life in the situation of Jupiter going over the ascendant is the removal of obstacles. And when we remove obstacles, things tend to have a sense of levity to them. And when we feel a sense of levity, we might indulge, we might party, we might like feast more, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing, like you're saying. So it's all going to show up in different ways, but I definitely would say that it's a time to remove obstacles that are in our way.
I love that you mentioned indulgence, because what is indulgence to one person might be something different to another. Exactly. When Jupiter was going over my ascendant, that was 10 years ago. Well, yeah, it was about 10 years ago. And what happened right around that time? So I'd been in Mexico for about, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 months at that point. And then all of a sudden I discovered dancing, like going to the clubs. And I started going to the clubs like 5 nights a week. Like, talk about indulgence. I went all out. I had a lot of fun. And so now that I reflect back based on what you just shared, I'm like, oh my God, yeah, that must have been my definition of indulgence for the time, was living it up, having a party. And I did. I really did. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. So let's see what the next party holds for me. I think that's something I'm looking forward to. Okay, let me ask you, I know that we're going to, because I want people to have value when they watch this. And I know that Cameron is going to go through the elements to help you to understand how to engage some techniques in medical astrology very directly. However, before you do that, Cameron, can you just touch on some of the things that you're going to be exploring over the course of this 5-week course that Cameron is going to be teaching with Synchronicity University? So once again, everybody, right now for a very limited time, Cameron's course, which starts in January 2023, there's just a couple weeks left to choose your tuition rate, as low as just $5 a class for a 5-week course, which is an unheard of rate for a course of this caliber and a teacher of this caliber as well. And so, yes, let us know a little bit about what people can expect to learn.
Yeah, so the first class in the 5-week course is called The Best Medicine is the Medicine Maker. And this is just talking about how, because in the class last year, we talked about just like the very fundamentals of things, just planet, houses, and signs, and how to think about them and see them from a holistic perspective. Well, now we talk about how to bring that into relationship with life, and how to find pieces of medicine everywhere in the world in every area of your life in order to infuse that in the astrology that you know. And in this way, we move away from thinking that we have to be a 5-star rank astrologer who studied for 25 years before we get practicing, because astrology will be utilized as a tool along with the other tools that we have in our medicine cabinet. And we keep focusing on the medicine that astrology could bring, but the medicine that we already carry within us, and also things that we can learn in our lives in order to become a medicine maker, right? And so in that way, that's the first class to begin with, and that's just the introduction. So it's more about how you see things. And when you know how to see things, then you know where not to go in a talk with someone when you're speaking about health or vitality or just like lifestyle choices. And you know where your restrictions are, but you also know where you can expand towards as well. And then the second class is talking about it's going a little deeper into constitutional theory. So just like the makeup of a person, and maybe how to like be able to just start going to the supermarket and being able to see if someone is choleric, or somebody has this fiery energy, or someone is earthy and has this melancholic energy, or airy and has the sanguine energy, or is phlegmatic and has a more watery nature. And then also how to look at that in a chart, but also look at it in a person. So if a chart isn't there, you still would be medicinal like the first class and be able to see and be able to assist people. It also, I find, when you understand constitutional theory, it makes you a kinder person. It makes you a more compassionate person. It makes you a more understanding person. Because if I know someone is melancholic, then I'm not going to expect them to be a go-getter like a choleric person. I might want them to be, but I'll be able to see that is not of their nature. And so I don't use a toothbrush to cook with, right? And so it's like knowing things like that is like really, really helpful for people. And also it gives people, when they don't necessarily have a depth of knowledge in like the medical field, they can give suggestions, or really even getting better at asking questions to people, to get other people to reflect and know themselves deeper. Even if you don't necessarily have all the answers, it still can be very helpful. And then third class is about mixing planetary energies. And so in the course before, we talked about just the planets themselves. Well, here we're learning how they combine with each other and how they influence each other. And that'll be from a perspective of how that might happen psychologically and emotionally, and how that will directly correspond to how that influences the physiological state of being as well, right? So for instance, if we have Saturn and Mercury, we mix those two together, and maybe we have restriction on my communication. Well, what does that do when you're walking through your life and you feel restricted in your communication? You might feel a little nervous. It makes you shut down and get a little cold maybe, and you feel a little frightened to speak your truth. And so what does that do to the nervous system? What does that do to the actual lungs themselves? And so reflections on these things make it very, very simple. In the fourth class, we'll talk about what I call Zodiacal Medicine, which will give a reflection of like an herb. It'll give a reflection of one highlighted organ system that has to do with a zodiac sign, to give people more knowledge on the actual organ systems and what their functionings are. And then it also will be like an embodiment practice, and we'll probably focus a lot on going through at least 6 of the 12 embodiment practices, so people can have a direct experience and really get into their body and be able to create a database in their own library of knowledge that exists within them to be able to share with people. And then in the fifth class, we'll just talk about how to embody the medicine and of all the things we went through, with chart examples and a lot of just like question, answer, and then probably a lot of practices as well. So people can really sink into, wow, like I have left this 5 weeks and I have my own stored knowledge now that I can share with anyone and everyone with a chart and or without a chart. So those are some of the things that we'll be talking about in the 5-week course.
And it's also that they actually get to experience that. It's a participation. It's not just like, okay, here's the information, but there's that experiential quality to it as well, where you're experiencing the medicine within you and how it's an engagement ultimately.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So important. You know, there's so many times I've talked to people after even just lectures at conferences, and I'm like, wow, that was amazing. Because like during the lecture, I'm like feeling it in my body or closing my eyes and imagining situations in life and reality. And other people are just like, I'm still letting it, I don't know. Like, I'm still like, and he said this thing and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I just dropped into it and experienced it. And so, you know, when we do that, again, like I said, we gather a library and a database that is like the medicine.
It's so powerful. Okay, so let's give people something they can use right away. And I know we talked earlier before we started interviewing, before we started this exchange, that you wanted to go through the elements to help people understand how to work with that. Can you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's this thing that I have, like, it's been on the back burner for a while, and it's really just like, we could call it like astrological athletics, essentially. And so it's just talking about the elements and the signs and what exercises might be good for them. Exercises or movement practice, depending on how one wants to look at it and where someone's at with that in their own experience. And so essentially it's just like thinking about if I have an excess or deficiency, and then also being mindful of the spectrum in between, you know, because maybe you need more or less depending on what your makeup is. So thinking about earth signs, let's say, you know, the earth is like very stable, it's structured, it can have a slowness to it, but it also could be perceived as steady rather than just slow. And so with earth signs, maybe we would get them going, get them moving, right? So maybe learning how to move the cardiovascular system, not just from the perspective of modern mainstream thinking where we have to go out and run, but actually just learning how do I get the energy to actually flow in my body? So something that I work with earth signs on a lot, or people who have like a lot of earth sign energy, is sometimes I just get them during the session. I literally will say, put your hands in the air for 30 seconds and then just like move your fingers. And then after the 30 seconds, you drop your hands and then you put them back up and then you do it again, like 2 or 3 times. And just by doing that in itself, energy is moving through the hands more. And so you're learning how to move your cardiovascular system, which the heart in the cardiovascular system corresponds to fire. And so if you have a lot of earth, maybe you want to bring that fire in. In other ways, if someone has a deficiency in earth signs, that I might get them to like lift weights more to create more stability and structure and strength in their body.
Just looking at the earth, if you lack earth, then you want to bring balance, because ultimately that's what we're going for, right? Is to bring balance to whom it is that you are, so that you feel as if you're more fully engaged on these different levels that are already a part of you. But if you're a lot of earth in your chart, then you kind of need that fire so that you're not so rooted that you don't move, so that you're immovable spiritually, emotionally, or otherwise. And you need fire for that engagement. And so you're giving these examples of exercises you can use to move the cardiovascular system, is essentially to activate fire, because it's connected to heart and blood, as you said. And so those people who might be lacking the earth element actually may need to be more fully rooted, more fully planted, so that whether they're doing the physical exercises to help them be more embodied, the other qualities that can show up as a result of that movement exercise that they're doing, or meditative exercises that they're doing, is that they'll be able to manifest things that they can feel good about as part of honoring the earthly incarnation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And so
That's amazing.
It's been really helpful. And the thing about it too, that I love the most, is that it's so practical that you actually leave with already knowing that it works. Like you already feel the tangible experience of it. And that's my favorite part of it. And so with the water signs, if someone has a lack of water, the first thing it's less of an exercise practice, really, honestly, but I ask them what makes them feel vulnerable. And then I invite them to go explore and look for songs that would allow them to actually be vulnerable in that experience and to just move their body in a way that feels like, oh my gosh, like I don't have this structure. I feel like I might be coming undone a bit. And for people who have an excess of water, and also everyone being mindful, again, it's about how you think. So there's a spectrum in between that, between the deficient and the excess. So when someone has an excess of water, I might invite them to get in downward facing dog and then just talk to them about how does that feel? And also, not only how does it feel, because you know how to feel a lot, how does it feel to stay structured in one position while you feel, so that you don't come undone and fall into a puddle of water? Because if your body knows what that feels like, it will translate directly to your emotional body and your psychological awareness.
And so when you say has too much or less, we should just explain to people as well. What you mean is you might have a lot of planets in water signs, or you might have a very dominant, you might have a very dominant moon or a very dominant Neptune. And then these end up pointing the way to somebody who maybe has an excess, but also pay attention to your life as well. Are you somebody with very strong emotions that feel really overpowering? Are you somebody who maybe cries really easily? These can all be signals that perhaps there's too much water energy playing out, whether it's in your chart or in your life. And you may want to bring some balance to that so that you can live more holistically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even add in like the environment in which you exist in, because there's some people that I've known, it's like they actually have a lot of water or they have an emphasized moon, and that water actually hasn't been moving because they lived in an environment which, let's say they lived in the desert, or let's say their father was a person who worked in the government or the military and he was very dry. And so it didn't allow that water to express itself. So be mindful of those things as well when we're thinking holistically, the environment that you exist within as well.
Yeah. That's so powerful to consider. I know that Ptolemy, in his book Tetrabiblos, which some people feel is the foundational text to Western astrology, in this book, he says that the culture you're born into, the country you're born into, the family you're born into has, according to him, an equal sway on your life, as does your chart. And so that's incredible. Like even going back 2000 years, he's putting it at about 50-50. He's saying, okay, the chart is there and it's a factor, but your culture, your country, your family also shapes you as well. And so it's interesting because you, in your own way, that's what you're affirming as well. Like if you have a lot of water in your chart, but then you grow up with really strict parents, or maybe your dad's in the army or something, it changes how you feel you can express that water and your relationship to that water in your chart.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to remember, sometimes there's like this false dichotomy. People talk about, is it nature or is it nurture? Right. And just being mindful of the combination blend of those two things in one's life, and how it expresses in the chart.
What element should be next? What do you want to talk about next? Air?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So the air element, the next is the air element. And so when we have an excess of air, I really just invite people to essentially go on walks and just go on walks, and I really invite people not to stop thinking, because that's like the last thing we want to do. It's like in the teachings that I've received from yoga, it's like a lot of times in this culture, we're like, oh, well, just meditate if you think too much. And it's like, actually, that's the last thing we tell people to do in yoga practice. We would never tell them to go sit down and meditate if you're starting from a chattery place, because literally that's just giving the mind more space to just go anywhere and everywhere. So we want to take in things in the environment, right? And so we want to breathe, and you want to reflect, and you want to consider and contemplate things in a slow way. So contemplating the leaves as they fall off the trees, and that will slow down the mind a bit. Contemplating, should I eat at sunset or should I eat when the sun is at its highest point? And why would I do that or not? These things that are more nature-based, and contemplating those things and allowing ourselves to know that when it comes to tomorrow, I can take another walk and I can contemplate again. And so my thoughts don't have to go in this spiral and like loop out, but they can kind of like sink in deeper into my body and then the body of nature that's around me.
I have a grand trine in air. So I have a lot of air energy, strong, dominant air energy. It's Sun, Mars, Pluto, grand trine in air.
Mm.
And yeah, I have found that I will go through periods where I will be completely in ideas. I'll be completely in mind. And that was part of the awakening that I had like 10 years ago when I realized, oh my God, like I'm embodied. I have a body, and the body has its own desire to move and things like that as well. Okay, so I'm asking you for advice now. What do I do with the fact that right now I'm visiting my parents in Canada? It's December, it's cold, right? I'm not trying to go outside. There's a snowstorm coming in a few hours, and I know I will not be going outside. When I have a lot of work, I literally know that if I'm going to get it done, I have to not go outside. I have to just focus and get the work done. And so, what do you do when you have, like, it's very cold, there's a blizzard, all of that? You can't really go outside, but you know you need that balance if you're going to experience a sense of well-being. What would you advise in that case?
Yeah, depending on the situation, I would probably advise, there was two things. I would give options. I like options. So the two options that I would give is crack the window a little bit so that you can feel the cold and just breathe with it and see if you can like contemplate, what does this actually feel like? Because when we get cold, oftentimes we start thinking a lot and we just forget about our body and we just shiver. But rather than that, I would like invite the cold to slightly invade me and to breathe with it and see if I can allow myself to move that energy. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm so cold. Can I breathe through this? And if you can't, close the window and don't do it, you know? And if you're already a cold person, probably don't do that as well. But another thing that I would invite people to do, because we're such a forward facing culture, is that I would invite people to take their hands and place it somewhere where they can feel their lungs, but from the back. And then just take a deep breath, but focus specifically on the back part of the ribs. And just
And
contemplate the nature of air. Because a lot of times when we're breathing, it's all in the front and we forget about the back. And so we need, and also if we think a lot, that's taking up a lot of information and space in our body. And so we want to, when we breathe, we want to bring back space for information. And so when it comes to that, the back body is like significantly deficient in like space and breathing. Even when we think about it, there's so many people in our culture that can do a forward fold, but how many people can do a back fold? And literally you can start learning how to do a back fold if you're okay and you go to your physician and check in with them first, of course, and just like breathe. Literally, we can start just by doing this and just leaning backwards. And just by doing that, we gather more information and more space for information to flow and move, you know? And so those would be the two things that come up just instinctually based off that question.
I could literally feel my back expanding in a way that, I mean, I don't remember the last time feeling that. And it's interesting because it's grounding. It's like bringing in earth in a way, because it returns you to body, and yet it's engaging air itself. Isn't that fascinating? You're working with the elements, or I'm working with the elements in my chart already, but I'm bringing balance to that energy by acknowledging that even breath and air can be a physical experience.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's interesting that you say you could feel more earth. And it's like when we do have a lot of air, which you said you had this air trine, it's like the air is so, it has all this levity and it keeps going up and up. And it's not even necessarily that we modulated the earth, but we brought the air back down and in so that it could be connected and synthesized with the earth, which brings more awareness to the earth. So yeah, that's a beautiful reflection there.
And so finally we have fire.
Yeah. And so for the fire signs, you know, one thing I tell people, especially, I always say, like, there's like a lot of people who are like fiery and go-getters, and they're like really like broy, and they like to lift weights and do hot yoga and all these other things and get it done. And I would say one thing to do is just lay in what they call shavasana, which is like the dead man's pose. You just lay there and you just be still, right? And see how long you can handle that. Most people, it's not that long that they can handle it, but it's all good because fire moves so quickly. And so if you're always on the go, 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 just by laying down for just 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, it can dramatically change the direction that the energy is going. And so I think that's a really important thing to do. And then also something I would say is to bring in more earth, just take the time to have pauses and just get into a squat position. Because when people have a tendency to have like a lot of fire, the energy is always going up and out. And so the energy is going to be moving towards the head. Even you think of like heating things, you think of heartburn, it's going up. You think of headaches, it's up here, all in the upper regions. When you think of sweating, it's coming up and outside of you. So to get in a squat position would literally be like the most down and in thing that you can do, but you'll still be in your body and you'll be finding ways to be more still than usual. So that's the one thing I would say. And if someone has a deficiency in fire, the first thing I always like to go to is what's called Kapalabhati, or also in Kundalini yoga, we call it the breath of fire. And so I would invite people to look that up, because I'm not going to necessarily demonstrate it here because I don't think everybody should be just doing it out of nowhere. But that is one thing that I would suggest as well. This also can be simply if someone, even just like from now to the end of this conversation, they point their toes for 30 seconds, point, use your fire, use your energy, use your willpower, and then let it go, and then flex, 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 flex. This allows the cardiovascular system to move again in a way that's not stressful. And so that will help the fire element move through the body with more ease and grace.
I love it. With more ease and grace. Cameron, you are just so bursting with knowledge, I will say. And that's just one of the many things I love about you as an astrologer. Once again, everybody, Cameron Allen is coming back to Synchronicity University. There's just a couple weeks left, if that, to choose your tuition rate, as low as just $5 a class to learn from the one and only Cameron Allen and his class on medical astrology that is coming up in January 2023, right around the corner. Cameron, thank you. Thank you so much for being here and coming back to Synchronicity University and just all the wisdom that you bring. I'm really looking forward to learning from you again.
I look forward to it always and forever. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. And thank you everybody out there for watching. Until we connect again, take care. Bye.